Hi, my name is Alyssa, and I have a complicated relationship with my faith. To give you some context, I was raised Christian, specifically Lutheran. This flavor of Christianity actually started years ago when a Catholic guy named Martin Luther had 95 problems with the Catholic Church, stapled him to the door, and peace be with you'd out to start his own church. And yeah, that's what I learned in Sunday school, along with the usual God loves you, no matter what, always stuff. Point is, the church I went to was as boring and basic as you can imagine. So why did I have yelling matches with my parents about me not wanting to go? Well, one day I reached an age where things were starting to get confusing. If the only way to get into heaven is by knowing God, but my cat can't go to church with us, is she gonna go to hell? If God has a plan for everyone and everything happens because of him, why did he break my friend's arm? If God created the earth 2,000 years ago, but my science teacher said dinosaurs lived on the earth millions of years ago, then what do I put on my science test? Alyssa, please, enough with the questions. Can't you just accept that you are God's child and he loves you? I know some kids can be disruptive little know-it-alls, but my questions were genuine. I was a God-loving Christian girl through and through. I would sing Jesus Loves Me when I was scared of the dark. I invited my friends to Palm Sunday, and we made a ton of those little crosses. And when kids would argue on the playground about who was the best at kickball, I would say, "Actually, God is the best. He's the best at everything." Well, she's good. I thought Jimmy was pretty good.
Skillshare, too. What? Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. Oh, yeah! Skillshare is the largest online learning community where you can access thousands of classes from a ton of different categories. They've got photography, business, arts and crafts, DIY, filmmaking, all kinds of stuff. And all led by seasoned professionals. So you can learn by doing. Find your superstar singing voice with Olivia Rodrigo's vocal coach. Unlock the secrets of storytelling from New York Times bestsellers. You can even learn how to animate from the comfort of your couch. Now, I'm a little too old to be playing kickball, but it's never too late to learn how to animate a 3D ball getting kicked. And for more in-depth topics like how to design and animate the cutest little creature you can imagine, Skillshare offers learning paths. These are sequential series of classes designed to help you master your craft, like this one. Go from idea to finished animation as a beginner with 5 classes led by Taniko Pentoa. You know, the incredible artist who's worked on a bunch of your favorite animated shows and movies. And it's okay if some skills take a little longer to master, because you can learn at your own pace. And for those of you who already enjoy Skillshare, good news! They've announced smarter class categories, new class topics that you have asked Skillshare to add, and easier ways to search for classes by filtering for different softwares and materials. So if you've been wanting to brush up on some old skills or learn something new, use my link in the description. The first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So go on, get learning. And now, back to the video. I wasn't looking for a gotcha moment in Sunday school. I was just a kid with questions about my religion and how it intersected with the rest of my life. I just wanted to know what the heck to put on my science test. But I quickly learned that asking these kinds of questions only made me a troublemaker to teachers and a weirdo to my classmates. So eventually, I stopped asking and just sat alone to wonder what to make of the world. Things got even more confusing when I started something called confirmation class. In the church I went to, 5th graders would begin attending confirmation class every Wednesday night for 2 years straight, where they would read through the Bible as a class, listen to lectures from their youth leaders, discuss important chapters, themes, people, and be sent home with Bible verses to memorize by next class. After those 2 years were up, they'd turn in a 1-page written paper titled What Jesus Means to Me and recite all 10 commandments as well as all 66 books of the Bible in order from memory to the head pastor. If they passed, they would confirm their faith at confirmation graduation, allowing them to accept the iconic little wafer and tiny glass of wine / grape juice if you prefer, every Sunday during communion, which is a huge deal. Communion is a very special ceremony that acknowledges the sacrifice Jesus made for those who are faithful to him. This is a massive milestone for someone growing up in this faith, and as far as I could tell, all the other kids at my church were ready to begin. But I was not. I was still struggling to make sense of it all. I begged my parents not to sign me up for it, but they saw it as an important step in my young Christian journey. This was part of every kid's path in our church, so why should I sit out? I was a Christian, right? I want to make it clear here, many other religions do this kind of thing too for their faith, and some kids love it. And although I desperately wanted to love it too, that just wasn't my experience. I couldn't convince my parents to not sign me up, so I figured I'll just make the most of it, you know?
maybe confirmation class will help fill in the gaps. Or at the very least, if I do all the assignments right, maybe then I'll feel like a real Christian. At first, I was able to memorize each homework passage and recite them at the next class. But eventually, the passages got longer, or harder, or we had to learn more than one, and I struggled with it. My parents tried to help me study, and they reminded me how good I was at remembering lines for theater, so remembering Bible verses was basically the same thing, right? Well, maybe for others, but not for me. In theater, my lines were part of one story that ended after about 100 pages, and even if I did have paragraphs of words to memorize and recite, I had months to learn it. The Bible is over 1,000 pages, has a lot more stories than your average grade school play, and some are written in ye olde English. And I had to memorize it all in a week. I tried my best to remember and recite, but I inevitably fell behind my other classmates. The first year passed, and things only got harder. I started getting bullied in 6th grade, and it was hard to make friends. And although there weren't any mean girls like that in confirmation class, it was still pretty lonely. I remember 2 girls specifically who were really chill, and I'd consider them my friends. But as for the other kids, I guess they had already made all the friends they wanted to make. And so when I saw my 2 friends hanging out with the other kids during retreats or events, I'd just say, "Hey, I'll catch up with you guys later," and find a quiet spot to sit and think. These weird social inconsistencies were compounding with the stress and confusion I already felt at church. If Jesus says to love our neighbor like ourselves, why are some kids nice and some kids mean? I wanted to talk to someone about how I felt, but I was scared that if I asked the wrong questions, I'd be shut down again or ostracize myself even more. It was then I started to wonder, maybe I just wasn't a good enough Christian. And that's why life was so hard. Because no one else seemed to have these kinds of troubles. But by this time, I had come to learn what many Christians know. Prayer is powerful. So I prayed every night for the bullying in school to stop, and I prayed for the Bible homework in confirmation class to make sense. I figured if my prayers were answered, I would fit in, and I would have more friends, and I could finally be a good Christian. But no matter how many times I prayed, or how long, or how hard, it just didn't seem to be working. And when you're a 10 or 11-year-old kid left to figure out this big of a problem all on your own, you may come to the same conclusion that I did. Maybe God just doesn't like me. My anxiety about church only increased from here on out. I couldn't help but feel like there was something inherently spiritually wrong with me, as if I would never be worthy enough to be a real Christian, no matter how hard I tried. I know now as an adult that I'm not the only person who's ever struggled with their faith or beliefs, but as a kid, no one else around me spoke about their problems, and I had learned by now that questions like that only annoyed people, so I really did feel like I was the only person in the entire world to ever have doubts about their faith, which only reinforced the idea that I was some blasphemous, troublemaking creature destined to hell from birth. I felt like it was only a matter of time until I got kicked out of confirmation class for not keeping up, or kicked out of church for not being a good enough Christian. My anxiety got worse and worse. I couldn't concentrate on learning the scripture. I dread going to church on Sundays, and every Wednesday I'd just sit there sweating and trying not to cry when the teacher would inevitably say, "So, I see you had trouble again memorizing this week's passage." I was given lots of opportunities every week to redo last week's homework and the week before's. I even got special one-on-one time with the youth group leader to help me get these words through my thick, stupid skull. She was super sweet, super patient, never said anything mean to me or anyone. She just wanted to help. But I was already giving it everything I had and still failing. There weren't any grades taken, but there also weren't any stories of kids failing the class either. So, as my final year of confirmation class was coming to a close, I began to prepare myself for the inevitable. I was going to be the first kid in the entire world to ever fail confirmation class. And that felt like the ultimate sign from God that I was a failure. But what was I supposed to do? I couldn't drop out. My parents wouldn't let me back then. Why would they let me now? And even if I was able to drop out, then what? If I didn't confirm my faith, then I'd never get to participate in communion. Therefore, I'd definitely be sent to hell. To make matters worse, I finally memorized the 10th commandment, do not covet. Our youth group leaders explained that covet basically means to want something very, very badly. I understand now as an adult that would translate to, don't be jealous of others, just be grateful for what you have. Comparison is the thief of joy. that kind of thing. But as a kid, I thought that my desperate desire to not be bullied in school or to not feel like an alien in confirmation class was me coveting and breaking a commandment. In case you don't know, do not murder is number 6. So I thought I was just as bad as, if not worse than, a murderer. When the 2 years were up, I went into my pastor's office with the loudest, heaviest beating heart. I was able to recite all 10 commandments, but since I was convinced I was guilty of breaking one, it just made my chest hurt even more. I felt like such a fraud, especially when my brain went blank after 2 Chronicles, and the pastor had to walk me through the remaining 52 out of 66 books of the Bible. And even though he said my essay was great, that praise made me feel even more guilty, because I didn't mean any of those words. I just wrote down all the nice stuff I overheard at church about what Jesus means to other people and literally prayed that my teachers wouldn't notice. So, okay, that prayer was answered. But my teachers had to know just as well as I did that Jesus meant nothing to me. When it was finally over and I met my parents in the hallway, I was waiting to be sentenced to another year of confirmation class. But to my surprise, the pastor told my family that I passed, and I'd be graduating with all the other kids next Sunday, so go get a white dress and we'll see you there. And of course my parents were so proud and excited, and they threw me a big party, and I stood with my class in front of the whole congregation to confirm my faith with a smile. But through every second of it, I felt like such a heathen. I didn't deserve to pass that class. I didn't deserve that grace. I didn't deserve to be there at all. And I know. Illy, this is the moment where a kid like you could see what those Christian values look like in action. Maybe that's why he let you pass. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's what he and all the youth group leaders and, heck, even Jesus was aiming for. But that's just not how I experienced it. This journey didn't open my heart to Jesus. It just turned my confusion up to 11. I tried to grasp the holy conclusion that all of my struggling and anxiety and self-blame was some kind of secret weapon to fill my Christian faith tank, but this experience just didn't do it for me. It didn't make me feel like a child of God with a strong testimony. It made me feel like a Furby getting hydraulic pressed to see if the voice box still worked. I felt guilty arguing with my parents about not going to church, and I felt guilty going to church. I needed to step away and learn what the heck Jesus actually means to me and no one else. So I did. As soon as I was done with confirmation class, I stopped going to church. It wasn't until many years later that I learned my experience was a mild case of religious trauma. Religious trauma occurs when a person's religious experience is stressful, degrading, dangerous, abusive, or damaging. And this type of trauma can unfold over a series of stages. Step 1, a person experiences a trauma. It could be related to their religion, but it doesn't have to be. So for me, getting bullied in school. Step 2, the trauma has religious implications, meaning your religion starts to play a role in how you get through it. So for me, I prayed for the bullying to stop, but the bullying didn't stop no matter how much I prayed. And step 3, the response from the religious community may re-traumatize you. For me, that was knowing from an early age that questioning my faith would lead to teachers getting mad at me and my peers excluding me. Therefore, when my prayers weren't working, I internalized it and came to some very unhealthy conclusions about my self-worth. If you'd like more information or support regarding religious trauma, check the links in the description for help. I say my experience was mild because a lot of it was indirect. Religious trauma usually comes up in discussions around the troubled teen industry, religious leaders being inappropriate with kids, or of course, being LGBTQ in a religious family or community. Again, as far as I know, the church I went to didn't do or believe those horrible things. I'd like to think most religious people don't. However, I did grow up in the American South, so I did hear prejudiced things being said by other kids, and even teachers at school, more frequently than supportive things, and they would often cite Bible verses to prove their point. This behavior within what was supposed to be my same religious community only pushed me away from my faith even more. As I grew older, I saw these debates weren't just happening on the playground. Adults have these arguments too, all the time about who's doing religion the best, who's doing it wrong, who's twisting God's words, and who is or isn't going to hell, which only made me more confused, because what if all this time I was doing the wrong religion? What if all my friends and my family picked the wrong God to worship? What if we all end up in hell, or whatever the correct word for eternal punishment is? Or if that's even part of it? I don't know. The only thing propelling me to find my faith was fear and shame. And I'll tell you now, if those hard feelings you hold against yourself aren't helped, they will hurt. The point of this video is not to stir up arguments in my comment section about who's right and who's wrong. The point of this video is to say, hey, if you don't feel comfortable at your place of worship, it's okay to reflect on that and talk to someone about it. Having doubts doesn't make you an evil, irredeemable person. And pushing down those feelings or beating yourself up for having them is only going to make you feel worse. I'm grateful my family came to understand where I was coming from, that our arguments fizzled out pretty quickly, and I was able to figure out my faith on my own terms. But that's not how that story ends for millions of others. Religious trauma isn't an easy thing to talk about, but it affects 1 in 3 Americans. Recognizing this trauma is important. It's why I made this video in the first place. If someone isn't allowed to discuss these complicated feelings without facing judgment or punishment, they'll have no other choice but to turn on themselves, too. Most of all, I want people to know what I wish someone had told me back then. For some people, religion is an essential, everyday part of their lives. But for others, it's not. And that's okay. Some people are lucky to grow up in a faith they are truly aligned with, but not everyone gets that same experience, no matter how hard they try to fit in. And believe you me, we try. Not everyone needs a religious practice, but that doesn't make them any less of a good person deserving of a good life. Thank you for watching my videos. Please check the helpful links in the description, and as always, stay safe.